Hello, everyone. Welcome to Seafood Matters, and thank you for joining us again. Today, I'm delighted to be chatting with Rodrigo Armada, Sustainability Director at Baja Aqua Farms Group. Hi, Rodrigo. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Jim. Pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to be on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward. For those not familiar, can you briefly explain what Baja Aqua Farms produces and where it sits in the global seafood market?
Yes, of course. So, Baja Aqua Farms is a bluefin tuna ranching company. We're an operation located on Ensenada, Baja California, right off the Pacific coast. We're around 2 hours south of San Diego, and our farm is located right in front of Coronado Islands, which are near the border with the United States. Basically, what bluefin tuna ranching means is we capture wild bluefin tuna and we tow them to our farm where we feed them for 6 to 12 months, and afterwards harvest to export internationally and some to the national market. And currently, the company is among the biggest producers in the world of bluefin tuna, providing high quality sashimi grade bluefin tuna for different markets.
My goodness, I didn't expect it was tuna you were going to say. Most farms are salmon.
Yeah. So I think we're a little bit in between the fishing and the aquaculture world because although it is not fishing because we feed the fish, it's not aquaculture per se because it's also not full cycle farming, right? So yeah, we're kind of in this niche around the world. There's few farms. You'll see farms in Australia, Japan, in the Mediterranean, and right off the coast here in Mexico and Baja California.
It, that must be a good product because obviously the way you describe it there, that's from wild right from the start.
Yes, and we're taking a native species and feeding it with also native species. So that's
Yeah.
part of the value added within the company is all the sardine and anchovies that we feed the tuna are locally sourced from here off the Pacific coast. So you're basically feeding the fish a similar diet to what they would be eating out there in the wild. That plus also having the cold waters, we have the perfect environment for a high quality product.
That sounds a terrific setup. Before we go deeper, can you give us a quick sense of your own background and what brought you into this role?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a sustainable development engineer. Before working here at Baja Farms, I'd worked as a consultant for a brief time, and also I worked in the canning industry. So, but for beverages. So I'd say I have a little more diverse background. What brought me to Baja Farms is I'm a local. I'm from Ensenada, Baja California. So there's Ensenada, if you know it, and if you don't, you should definitely come to know this beautiful city. We're basically a wine and food city. Therefore, there's not too many sustainability opportunities. So when I had the chance to apply here at Baja Farms and work within the aquaculture industry, work with the ocean, and also be able to work within the sustainability field, everything made sense for me. So it was kind of the right time, right place to be. And that's how I came to Baja Farms. And since then, I've been here for 4.5 years now. I started here at the end of 2021, and since I've stayed.
Okay, brilliant. What does sustainability actually mean to Baja Aqua Farms on a day-to-day basis?
So, I mean, more so than what it means to the company, it's very important to, I think, from a personal sense, sustainability has become a term that everybody tries to interpret in their own way. And I think there we can all align to a more homogeneous definition. That way, we all go within the same standard, right? So for us here at the company and personally, sustainability, or even more so sustainable development, it has much to do with, like it comes similar to the Brundtland sustainability definition, and which make proper use of natural resources to attend, I would say, not market demands, but rather social and well-being necessities. So
Yeah.
the proper use of natural resources to attend human requirements and needs, meanwhile also allowing the same ecosystem from where you're extracting these natural resources to
Yeah.
continue to thrive throughout time, not only to be able to attend the needs of future generations, but also keep serving those same purposes that those resources were meant to serve, right? So thinking about ecosystem services not only provided to humanity, but also to the same habitat and ecosystem they belong within. So it has a lot to do with just I think it starts with empathy, having empathy and being uh, understanding that we are part of and not owners of those resources, right? So I think that's the way we look at it.
If from listening to you, Rodrigo, if I was to put a word to it in my head from listening to you, it would be ethics, good ethics.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, it's going back to our roots. I think people, humans in general, we're very empathetic creatures, and being just mindful of where we are and where we stand currently as a society within this ecological crisis. I think it's very important to have that in mind whenever we're taking decisions, and it gives us a much more holistic point of view whenever we're taking business decisions, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's where we start.
Yeah. Aquaculture is often promoted as the future of seafood, but it is also its critics. What are the biggest environmental pressures for your operation faces?
Great question. I think that whenever we're talking about any primary industry, there's going to be pushbacks, and actually I think those pushbacks from society are the ones that enable companies to continue to innovate and thrive within changing geopolitical, social, and environmental aspects, right? So for us, I'd say the main ones are, well, I think they're relatively obvious. You're taking two resources from the water, right? So the two main things are what's the state of those fisheries, the state of the bluefin tuna fishery, what's the state of the sardine and anchovies fisheries. So since those are our main natural resources that we extract from the water, we've got to make sure that they are able to replenish and the population is able to stay in a sustainable the biomass that stays in the water is still a sustainable population. So these two, I'd say, are the main points that we need to look at, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing in those regards. And also, not any less important, I think the other environmental issues that are most critical to our operations are our carbon footprint. It is we are a carbon intensive, I'd say, a carbon intensive operation, just from the diesel that we require to catch the fish, the diesel that's required to operate the farm, right? And of course, having a company that exports most of its product, our scope 3 carbon footprint I think it's also a hard issue to tackle, but still, I think it's important to have in mind. And finally, the environmental impact that I think, and this is general throughout the aquaculture industry, the environmental impact that we have on site, right? So, how do we manage our farm and the impact that we have in the local ecosystem where we have our operation? I'd say those were the key ones.
Yeah. And when you look at your farms today, what's the one area you know still needs real improvement? I suppose that's an ongoing situation, is it?
Requires improvement. I'd say that just, and we're still working on it, but continue innovating in improving our FCR. That's, and it's been a critical issue that a lot of people point out about the industry. And although I think it's a complex conversation, I think we are very mindful of it, and we put a lot of effort and innovation behind that main issue. I'd say improving on FCR, and also, yeah, I'd say that's the most critical issue that we still have. Not necessarily because of the impact that it has at the farm, but the impact that you're having from the extraction from this natural stock.
Yeah, yeah. And feed is always a central issue. Is there any sort of idea to reduce the reliance on wild fish input?
Yeah, so of course, alternative feed is something that we've explored in the past. We've just not come with the correct mix and diet that we would need. Furthermore, we're also, and I understand this point of view, still skeptical of which are the new environmental impacts that we are going to open if we were to start transitioning to alternative feed. So what I'm talking about is when we look at feed and comparing two feeds from an life cycle analysis point of view, we start broadening the conversation, right? So, and I think this is a good segue to talk a little bit about how we've been managing the sardine fishery to ensure that this is not a population that is neither risk of collapsing nor going to an unsustainable levels, right? So actually part of what we're doing is we're within an MSC improvement project where we've worked with 85% of the sardine vessels throughout the whole Baja California Peninsula. That's two states, Baja California and Baja California Sur. We've allied with our industrial partners to go for the MSC certification. We're still working on it, as you might imagine, coordinating efforts between 13 different companies along two states has taken a few years, and we've taken a lot of action to improve how we manage the fishery. So I put that into context because I think that is an important starting point. If we are able to sustainably manage the fishery, we are able to continue our operation while also being mindful of that resource and taking care of it through different harvest control rules that we've voluntarily implemented within this fishery. So from that point of view, the risk of going to alternative feed is, of course, well, today we don't give any vaccines to our fish. We don't use any antibiotics. We don't use any type of chemicals. So going from a natural feed to alternative feed, we have a higher risk on affecting fish welfare, and also any waste from the feed that goes to the bottom of the seafloor has a much higher impact than the waste of the sardines, because currently, and we know this because we monitor the seabed floor monthly and do test every 6 months of the seabed health. We know that a lot of that waste is being consumed by the same environment. We have a ton of sea lions, lobsters, crabs, shellfish on the seabed floor. So, although we want to reduce waste at the maximum, the fact that they are sardines, the same ecosystem is consuming those rather than if we had any type of pellets. So we just take into account all of these factors, plus of course economic factors, before taking a decision on transitioning to alternative feed. So although we have explored some with local universities, we have still not find that correct mix. And considering all these factors that I previously mentioned, that make us feel comfortable with that decision and transition.
I would take it that you're confident in the traceability and sustainability of your feed.
100%, 100%, because
Yeah.
we're a vertically integrated company, and it's a partner company, a sister company that is extracting that sardine. So we are very hands-on with how it's managed. Some of the actions that we've taken is we've now have an absorber on board program with 100% coverage of all the vessels that are part of the certification alliance. Not only that, but we've also implemented fishing bans, voluntary fishing bans. So last year we had a fishing ban for 3 months on specific bay where we had juvenile fish. That's like at the beginning of the year from January to March. That's when sardines spawn. Actually, right here in the Dos Santos Bay, right here in Ensenada. And we basically closed that as an industry. Nobody could fish there. And that allowed to drastically reduce the incidence over juvenile fish on more than 50% versus the previous year. So I see that we're taking real action to reduce the environmental impact that we have, not only by the fishing operation, but allowing to the stocks to continue to replenish and be there for the long run.
I don't know if there's something I'm not getting right here, Rodrigo, but if there's fishing bans or quotas or that, when you're not catching fish, you're ranching them, would you be coming to any of that bans?
So the fishing ban that we had last year, like I mentioned, it was specifically for a region. Therefore, we could still fish sardine on other regions within the peninsula, just not specifically here.
Okay.
So it was more of a ban to allow the juvenile fish to continue to replenish. That was the main objective, to protect juveniles, because that was what was pointed out by our technical science team, that was the critical issue that we need to attend to as an industry. So that's why the decision was made.
There's one thing that comes to mind on the feed you're talking about, Rodrigo. You might say, well, yes, not you might say, I would definitely say I'm probably thinking a bit selfish, but I would say before you give all the anchovies and sardines to the tuna, I would like to think you would keep some for yourself.
Unfortunately, the Mexican market is not very. There's not a high appetite for sardine and anchovies in the Mexican market.
Wow.
It has nothing to do with Europe. It is a very different world. Here in Mexico, there is a very, very low acceptance of that product. So I know that sometimes the argument is, well, why don't we take those sardines and those anchovies to feed people around the world? When we don't have not even local markets, we need to explore international markets to be able to put that product there. And also, because there's no local demand, and when I say local, I mean at a national level in Mexico, we don't have the infrastructure nor the know-how for high quality canning of
Yeah,
certain
yeah,
things. And so everything that goes behind that industry, we don't have it developed in this country.
yeah, yeah. On fish welfare and ethics is getting more attention. How do you define and measure it in a commercial operation?
So from a commercial point of view, it's actually very straightforward because the and and I say this because the better off the tuna are, the higher quality of the product. So if we are able to maintain a low stress levels on tuna, we're able to maintain low stocking density on our pens. That leads to a drastically lower mortality rate. And also, whenever we take the tuna out, as long as the harvest is as humane as possible and less stressful possible for the tuna, that product is also going to come out in the highest possible quality. So I'd say that maybe it's two ways. One, we have the ethics side of it, so the proper handling of the fish, just for the simple reason that it is a living being, and at the end of the day, we need to, like I was mentioning, be mindful and empathetic with our resources. And we can't just think of it as something that we own, therefore, being very mindful of that and respectful of the fish. And then, from purely a commercial point of view, because as you might imagine, we don't, as much as we like to think that everybody thinks the same in all the companies, we all have our different drivers. And from the commercial team, the driver is very straightforward from the market point of view as well. Is the better you take care of that fish, the higher the quality, and therefore everything makes sense. And that's how we've been able to maintain. I consider a high fish welfare standard.
Yeah, that's excellent. And how do you approach stocking density and or harvesting?
So the stocking density that we manage in our pens is at 3 kilograms per cubic meter. That's what we manage, and how we are able to manage it is we have ROVs, remotely operated robots that we use to monitor the tuna pens daily. And those cameras, our team also measures the tuna. So we follow on a monthly basis how much our tuna has grown, and therefore we're able to also manage the stocking density. We see a population within any of those pens that is growing a lot. Well, we know that we need to harvest it pretty soon to be able to relieve some of that excess of tuna that we might have. And also broadening a little bit more the conversation on how we take care of our tuna, we monitor its health daily, and we also clean the tuna pens daily because visibility is a key factor. And when we have a lot of algae that attaches itself to the pens, it lowers visibility drastically, and therefore it reduces how much our tuna eats. So we also have a roof that allows us to clean these tuna pens automatically, and our team goes, I'd say we clean the whole farm in around 20 to 25 days, depending just on different factors, right? How much work our team has. But this is part of the continuous operation that we follow to be able to ensure the best environment for our tuna. And then going to the harvesting side, we practice ikejime for the harvest. So this basically, for the audience that doesn't know, we stun the fish, and after we stun this fish, we quickly I don't know the best way to explain this. we have a diver that is in the water, and after tunas are stunned, they grab them and they kill them, make them brain dead. They spike their brain in case they didn't die by the electrical stun. And afterwards, they bleed them out and continue the whole Ikijime sacrifice method. And we've seen that this is the most humane and stress-free way that we can sacrifice our fish. It's any harvest. If anybody has seen a harvest, doesn't matter the species. It's always going to be a more bloody scene, but we try to make it as humane as possible.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. The thing that I was wondering, I thought it was interesting when you were saying about if you don't clean it, do you see the food consumption go down? Because I was just thinking, if that fish, just say the tuna, were in the wild and there was bad weather, well, the bottom would be stirred up and it would be difficult for them to see in a natural environment.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on their behavior in the wild. Therefore, I'd say that I'm probably not the proper person to answer the question.
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
I didn't mean I was wanting you to answer that. It was just a thought that
Yeah.
they would come across that in the wild. So, do you feel that they're eating what they're seeing?
Yes, definitely.
Wow.
Definitely. We've seen it in the farm. Actually, that's one of the parameters that we take into account whenever we're going to feed. If we have very low visibility levels in the water because, I don't know, there's high microalgae concentration, for example, or it's just bad weather, we drastically reduce the amount of feed that we're going to give to the tuna. Or if it's just too bad weather, we just don't feed it, because we know that that's not going to be eaten. It's going to all go to the seabed floor. So that is one of the key parameters that our farm team looks at whenever we're taking daily decisions on the feed. Because of course we have it planned, but as you and your listeners also know, the sea is always unpredictable. So any plan that you have, the sea has other plans.
Yeah. Is there a point where productivity and welfare come into conflict? And how do you handle that?
I think we prioritize the welfare. We prioritize the welfare over the production because one of the mainstays of our brand is the quality of the fish. And as I was mentioning before, we know that if we want a high quality fish, we need not only a high quality operation, but also a high quality care. So we will always prioritize the welfare of the tuna over the production. And some of those examples, of course, as I was mentioning, not feeding the fish, although you might lose a few pounds of not growing them out whenever there's bad weather, but it's just a stressful situation, so you're not going to prioritize that. And just others ways that we do that, of course, is having a harvest that takes a longer time. So our harvest sometimes can take up to 6 hours because of the way that we do it. So it is an intense operation, but good thing same time.
Yeah. And what impact do your farms have on surrounding marine ecosystem?
So at least from the studies that we do periodically on the water quality and the sediment quality is minimum. So fortunately, as I was mentioning, because of the type of feed that we give, the impact on the seabed floor has, at least from what we've been studying, minimal to very low. Furthermore, there is a the island that's right behind us, the Coronado Islands. It's a natural protected area by the Mexican government, and we have a close relationship with an NGO here in Baja California that's, that studies and protects the habitats and all islands throughout the Pacific coast. And from our talks with them, the at least from a seabird, because they specialize in seabird populations. From a seabird perspective, the 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 species and populations have stayed practically the same. We haven't seen any impact in that point of view. And also, a very important thing that I haven't mentioned is where we're located is far up the coast, and therefore we have very strong marine currents in that area.
Oh, yeah.
So we have, yeah. So we are fortunate enough to have a space where it's naturally depurated. So at least from the studies that we've made, we've seen a low impact on the local ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be important. That'll be important for the quality of the tuna as well, will it? The mussel.
Of course, of course, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you monitor seabed health, waste, and biodiversity around your sites?
So waste and biodiversity, how we monitor it, we have cameras that we take to the seabed floor, and it's the same rough that we use for the nets that is able to stay right next to the net. It also, we take it down to the seabed floor, and we go throughout all of the pens. We have a planning. So 1 month we'll monitor one area of the farm, another month another area of the farm, and that way we're able to cover the whole farm in the span anywhere from 2 to 3 months, depending on the frequency. We've lowered that frequency actually, because when we started the monitors, we did that weekly, and we noticed that there was very low impact and very low waste on the seabed floor. So that changed to every 2 weeks, and then it changed to monthly. So that's how we monitor that. It's from a visual point of view. So we have biologists that look into the species that we're looking at, how many species we're looking at, and also looking at spots in the seabed floor in case there's like white spots where there's having degradation. We haven't identified any of those white spots where we have degraded seabed floor. And from the first question, we take samples from the seabed floor every 6 months, and we analyze those in independent laboratories to see it more from a chemical and biological point of view. And in those analyses, we base off Friends of the Sea certification and what they dictate within the parameters that we need to monitor. So we monitor those parameters in the certification, and that gives a good screenshot on the health. I know, and we know that it is much more than that, but that's the way that we started. And as we continue to progress within our sustainability strategy, we'll continue to enhance those studies to have a broader perspective.
Okay, yeah. If a site shows signs of environmental strain, what action would you take then?
Well, the first action that we would take is we would need to see if it's the whole farm that is affected, or if it's only part of the farm. If there's only one part of the farm that's affected, we would take those pens out of that region. And we have other aquaculture concessions that we could take those pens to, and that way the site is left off to replenish. So, and in case the whole site that was the condition for the whole site, we would need to have a proper planning to see if we would be able to allocate the whole farm to our other sites. And if so, that would be the action. If not, we would need to maintain some of the pens there, rotating in different areas of the concession, and the rest move to our other concessions that we have more to the south. Because as I mentioned, those are that concession that we mainly operate is near the border, and we would need to take those pens to more here to the south. So that flexibility that we have as a company is also a way to manage that potential risk. Because of course, whenever you have an intensive feeding operation, there will come a time where we will probably need to let that site rest. And that's why, as a company, there's been some effort to diversify different areas where we can farm.
Okay, yeah. Is there any certification standards you work with?
Well, currently, we have only Friends of the Sea, and it mainly has to do with their certifications for aquaculture and their certifications for fishing. There's no certifications for farming, and that's something that we've come across in the space, which is why, as I mentioned, we're focusing on certifying the fishing practices for the extraction of our feed. And further pipeline, we want to do the same for bluefin tuna. So in a sense, since we're not able to certify our farm by ASC or BAP because it is not aquaculture, and since the product cannot go with a label of MSC because it's not fishing either, our strategy is similar to let's say a hotel. A hotel has a sustainable supply chain policy. So their procurement policy is going to tell them that they can only buy fish from MSC certified or ASC certified. We're doing the same with our farm. We're only going to enter to our farm feed that comes from an MSC certified fishery, and we're only going to stock in bluefin tuna that comes from an MSC certified fishery. This way, we're able to ensure everything that goes in already comes from a sustainable managed population. And then it's just focusing on the aquaculture practices and adhering to standards, although being mindful that we cannot certify the farm itself because there's no farming certifications.
Okay.
So there are more so references in how we should properly manage our farm.
And do certifications reflect what's really happening on the water?
I think they are a good mechanism for consumers to have a good idea on some of the practices that go on farms. But I would not call it the do-all, end-all. Because if we're taking actions to, for example, how do you manage your waste? Not only the waste, I'm not talking specifically the waste from that is generated by the fish in the water, but the waste from our operation. How do you manage it? Or how do you manage your carbon footprint? ASC in the latest version of their standards, they included carbon footprint within it and carbon reduction plans, and I think that's great. But before that, we didn't see that as an industry. How do you manage your water footprint? So I think although certifications, like I mentioned, are a good way for consumers to be able to have more visibility on how companies operate, there's still a lot of things that are not possible to cover with those certifications, and we need to do a little bit more of a deep dive from a consumer point of view on what companies do in specific topics. And that's a reason why we last year we published our first sustainability report adhered to the GRI standard. That way we can give our consumers, clients, and any stakeholders interested more visibility of our operation, and not only from an environmental point of view, but also from a social and labor practices point of view, because sustainability is not only about the environment.
Yeah. Do you feel sustainability's got a cost?
Well, it depends, because not implementing sustainable practices for me has a much higher cost.
Yeah.
But the cost is just distributed to different affected stakeholders. So, talking about cost, if I am going to, I don't know, say a pipe dream, we're gonna put all 100% renewable energy on the farm, right? That'd be awesome. But it's very complex. But let's say we're able to do that. Yes, that will have a high capex cost, and in the short term, it will have an impact on our shareholders' pockets. But I argue first that we'll have an ROI that allows our shareholders to recoup that investment. And more so than that, as I mentioned, if they were not to take that cost themselves, that cost is extrapolated to the rest of the population in the world that live within a climate that's degrading. So whenever we don't invest in sustainability, I think we're just externating cost to others. Rather, and another example, if we were not, if which is not the case, but if we were not to invest in security, well, if we don't ensure that we have in, not security, sorry, safety. If we were not to have a safe operation, well, you're externating the cost of not having the proper practices to your employees. If he suffers an injury, he's going to have that cost rather than the shareholders. So whenever we invest in sustainability, I think we are just investing in people and the environment. And although this will come from an economic point of view as a cost to shareholders or the company itself, if we were not to do that investment, I think we're externating costs to the environment or community or the employees.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I think my question I was going to ask you just now, I think you've already answered it. In tougher market conditions, what gets tested first, margin or sustainability commitments?
That's a great question. Well, I think it's company dependent. It depends on. It comes down to the priorities of the shareholders, and also looking if you have tough market conditions, how long those tough market conditions are going to last, and again, what's the risk appetite that the shareholders of the company might have, right? Are they comfortable with going with the risks of a tougher market for a 6 month period, or if it's very uncertain, will that lead to different decision making? I think that's a hard question to answer because it varies from company to company. I'll do a caveat that I would put for Baja Farms is, fortunately, I think we have a product that, although right now I'd say the market is very unstable with everything that's going on around the world, wars and everything.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get political here, so I won't go into depth of that. But although we have those conditions within the market that are restricting the consumption of our products, our product has been able to stay afloat. And I think that just talks highly about, again, the quality of the product. So although I think bluefin tuna is a product that competes with a lot of different proteins in the premium market, but we've been able to stay with a steady demand thanks to what we have offering of a company, stable supply, 365 days a year, and you know that it's always going to be a high quality product. So maybe those tough market conditions don't affect us as much. Therefore, our shareholders are also able to not be restricted as much by those market conditions to take any decision regarding sustainability investment.
But I would have thought anyway, Rodrigo, with the ethics and all you've talked about with your operation, I know from past experience, but I would say if it was a tough market situation, I think people would still go for your product first.
Yes, I would. I think that I would hope for the same. I would hope for the same.
Yeah, well, you've got standards that you keep to, and they're high. And I'm quite sure, like every other industry, there'll be those that are not, the standards are not so high.
Yes. Yes.
We know them.
Yes. Yes. Of course. Of course. They all have names and last names, right? But
Yeah,
I think that's the step that the company's taking right now, and
yeah,
because and when we look at it, sustainability is very new for this company. The department started basically 2022, right? So our efforts are, I'd say we're just looking at, we're in the first 100 meters of a marathon. So I think we have a long way to go still. But as you mentioned, I think that the practices that we're putting forth and we're putting out there are leading to a higher loyalty from our consumers, and we take pride in
yeah.
that.
And when you are to a standard, there's no question you do get that loyalty.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Are consumers driving change, or is it coming from retailers or the supply chain?
I think both. I think both, and it just depends where you are in within the whole chain, supply chain. For example, we are not yet, but we're still not yet a consumer-facing company. What I mean by that is, you're not gonna go to Whole Foods tomorrow or Costco and see Bluefina steaks. We sell directly to distributors, retailers.
Right, yeah,
So we, and I think it is cascades down, right? So we see it from the retailer and distributors are pressuring us to improve our standards, but that comes from a demand from the consumer side, end consumer, that is saying, hey, we want sustainable products. We want protein that is properly sourced. We want traceability in our seafood. We want to know where this fish come from, especially thinking about all the IUU that goes around the world. I think that it comes from consumers and it's elevated by distributors and retailers directly to producers, and we need to adhere to that. Yeah.
yeah. And what innovations are you most focused on right now? Is it feeds technology or offshore systems?
It's feed technology. We've started this transition in 2023. Well, at the end of 2023, in October, we installed the first centralized feeding system for bluefin tuna in the world. And we are aiming for in 2027 having the second centralized feeding system for bluefin tuna in the world, and that way we will be able to feed 100% of our farm with two centralized feeding systems. So the next question I would imagine is what are these centralized feeding systems? So similar to in salmon farming, where you have a, let's call it a mothership that feeds all the pens, we want to do the same in bluefin tuna. In bluefin tuna, how it's traditionally been done is so at least when I first arrived to this company, we used to have, I think it was like 10 or 12 boats, and there were these feeding boats that would go around the whole farm feeding the tunas and basically just pumping from, it was very artisanal method. If you go to other parts of the world, they will still use shovels to shovel sardine, or you'll have just a simple pump and it goes from a PVC tube just dropping to the pens. So what happened? First, we had a lower utilization factor from the tuna. Second, like I mentioned, these were 10 to 12 boats that were going around the farm, so you have a much higher carbon footprint. Secondly, the conditions for our people in this smaller boats, there were old boats, very small. They weren't ideal. So going from those smaller boats that were inefficient on feeding, they were inefficient on diesel consumption, we go to two only two boats that feed the whole operation. We have much better conditions. We have a gym for the people. We have bigger spaces for them to rest. So I think we are able to improve living conditions for the people. We're able to reduce the amount of diesel that we consume and therefore reducing our carbon footprint. And we're able to also feed better and have a higher utilization factor, which in the long run leads to taking less sardines out of the water. And this has been a operational transformation that we've been undergoing. And this is where we put our efforts and the shareholders have put investment to.
That sounds good. Are we moving towards genuinely low impact aquaculture or just incrementally improving?
I think we're still in the incrementally improving phase. We still have a ways to go. And it's not entirely because of the industry. And again, I wouldn't like to generalize because each company is doing their own efforts and each industry is, and I say that each industry is in a different maturing process. Bluefin tuna ranching has been around in Mexico for 30 years. And when you compare that to maybe oyster farming, or that has much more years, and it's also less intensive, I'd say that they are further along just because of the nature of the species itself. Oysters, the bivalves themselves just are filter feeders, right? So I think we're still improving. We have a ways to go, but I see a lot of positive change. And if you were to ask me what do I see in the horizon that really inspires me, I'm just seeing, I think it was in Norway that they installed off-grid floating systems to have renewable energy for the farm. I think those are the next steps that as an industry, we need to start taking. So, for example, today, now, maybe in 2027, when we have only two boats basically feeding the whole farm, well, most of our load is going to be an electrical load. It's going to be electrical load because it's not going to be the main ship's motor that is operating the operation itself. It's going to be generators that we have on the vessel that feed the pump, the feeding system, that feed refrigeration, that feed all the electrical loads within the boat. So if most of the energy being consumed is electrical load, that's great news because you're able to transition to renewable energy. So I think that's a step in the horizon. And another one that's, I think, fascinating and honestly very interesting regarding environmental impact of the farms is having integrated aquaculture systems. So maybe I'm not saying this is something for today or for tomorrow, but a few years down the line, having algae within our farm, while also having bivalves within our farm, to be able to drastically reduce the impact that we have naturally in the farm itself. So I think those are still the next steps that we need to take as an industry and having a more holistic approach to sustainability.
That sounds very interesting. But what's you might say I'm a bit confused, but I would have thought something that would have been good for yourselves in Baja farms would be the fact that tuna is such a high value. You're not having to just constantly be thinking of volumes.
that helps us a lot. Yes, definitely,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely. We actually currently there's ongoing talks at an international level between the different companies, different countries that operate these RFMOs, the regional fishery management organizations that manage the stocks of bluefin tuna.
yeah,
And at least what, from a Mexico point of view, industry point of view, what we're pushing for is the least amount of growth within the quotas. We want the quotas to stay as they are right now because we're mindful that this is a stock that was depleted in 2010. Fortunately, as of 2022, the species recovered, is officially not overfished anymore. We wanted to get to a point where it's a sustainable population, and I think we're right in the cusp of that. And for us, yeah, we don't want more fish. But the question was regarding where do we see this industry within the sustainability path, and that's why my answer was that, right? Because we see, I think we want to push for sustainability not as a slogan for the brand, but as something real that we adopt as a company. And therefore, we need to be always pushing for more, always pushing to how can we improve our operation? How can we be not only more efficient, but how can we get to a point where we're a net positive operation in which the amount of value that we extract from the environment, we're able to give back just as much.
yeah. Adding value.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Do you see a realistic path to fully decarbonized aquaculture?
I think it that's a very good question, and it's complex because it involves innovation in different spaces. So to be able to have a fully decarbonized aquaculture industry, we also need shipping and from airline shipping to become fully decarbonized because that's how we get the product to our consumers and to our
Yeah,
clients.
yeah,
We also need innovation in ships. So today we see that shipping has now hydrogen vessels down the pipeline, but where have we seen any of that innovation for fishing vessels, for example? So I think there's still innovation that needs to go in marine engineering and in the shipping industry, specifically air shipping industry, to be able to get to a fully decarbonized aquaculture. Because the operation itself, yeah, I think most of it can be decarbonized, but everything that has to do with taking fish out of the water and taking the fish from our plant to our consumer, those two, which are the most critical drivers for the growth of the carbon footprint, those are the ones that need to be tended to, and those are, although the aquaculture industry should put pressure to that, and we are, it needs to come from different industries as well.
okay, okay. And what would you feel was the biggest misconception people have about farmed fish?
Um, I think the biggest misconception that people have about farm fish is that it is an unhealthy or non-natural protein source, and they rather drift away from aquaculture products and they rather choose beef or pork or maybe a fish that was caught by the local fishermen. And although I think it's super important to continue to put first and foremost in our list local produce, and of course that local fishermen to continue helping them. Comparing seafood and general aquaculture products with beef, pork, lamb, I mean, it's not even a conversation from life cycle analysis and ecological footprint point of view. It is a much more responsible sourced protein to have almost any aquaculture species rather than those other proteins. So I think the consumers, whenever they hear, oh, they use antibiotics, or the classic in salmon farming that the color the salmons have are is not natural when it comes from farming, this misconception that that is unhealthy or bad for them, that's and I think that is still affecting consumers' decisions, and we need to, as a global population, I think we need to start consuming much more seafood, not only because we need to source more protein, healthy protein sources for our population, but also because we need to start driving down the consumption of proteins that have a high ecological footprint.
Yeah. And with that, is there any sort of criticism you would say the industry just maybe isn't quite yet getting right?
I think the industry itself is doing a really good job to listening to what consumers are asking for. I think that we need to improve how we communicate those efforts that companies are putting to attend to those criticisms. And honestly, just at least from the short time that I've been in the seafood industry, I've never seen any criticisms that are taken on a negative point of view. I think most of them are seen as constructive, right? For example, we hear what people say about we're taking from natural stocks. I hear that. We're conscious of that, so we're trying to do our best to have sustainable fish in stocks. And whenever I've seen, again, criticism to the industry, we need to source better sourcing for alternative feed. So you're starting to see a lot of innovation and bring in different, even cricket protein into the mix for feed for aquaculture. So I think the industry is doing a good job to tending those criticisms, and that I think today is maybe not as visible because those changes take time. It's not a straightforward process to go from one feed to another, or to changing how you operate a farm, or changing where you source your fish from. It takes time. So I think maybe some changes are still not as visible as consumers might want them to be. But I'd use this question to say I think in general the seafood industry is doing a good job, and maybe what we're lacking is more on how we properly communicate what we're doing to
Yeah.
tend those criticisms.
No, that's good. That's good. I wasn't trying to catch you out with that one.
Yeah, you get
It's, if we're sitting here again 10 years, what would success look like to Baja Aqua Farms?
I think for us is, I go back to, have we been able to innovate to tend to the critical points that I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, right? So I mentioned the extraction of natural resources, those being sardines, anchovies, and tuna. The impact that we have on our farm and our carbon footprint. So in 10 years from now, what would look as success is having all of the fisheries that we take fish from, anchovies, sardine, and tuna, all having them MSC certified with above 90 grades on all those certifications, meaning that we've highly improved the management of those resources, and therefore the maybe those questions on are we depleting the resources are not only tended to, but also we are certain that those fish are going to be in the water for a much longer period of time. Second, having some type of aquaculture, integrated aquaculture system. I think I think for us that, and we were not able to talk about it in this conversation, is the impact that we have from toxic algae blooms that happen just
Yeah.
because of the region that we're at. So also, again, going back to fish welfare, there's different studies that show that combining macroalgae within finfish operations has a very high positive impact on not only the ecosystem itself, but also as a mechanism to reduce the impact by microalgae because they compete with them. And finally, integrating renewable energy to our farm to start reducing what we can reduce. So, as I mentioned, maybe we're not able to reduce the carbon footprint from the fishing vessels, nor the export of fish, but where we operate, the site that we operate, being able to start the transition to renewable energy. I think those three components, certifying our fisheries, having renewable energy installed at the farm, and having an integrated aquaculture system at the farm as well. Those three components, I'd say that would be a evidence of a successful sustainability strategy.
Oh, that's good. And would there be any sort of, would you say, what would failure look like and what's at risk if the industry doesn't get it right?
Well, I think the first part of it, if we don't get it right, if we're not able to certify those fishing stocks, the whole narrative collapses. Because if we're not able to certify those fishing stocks, it's for a reason. It's because those stocks are not in a sustainable state. And if we're not able to ensure that, well, that means that we need to reduce how much fish we're taking out of the water. And maybe that means shrinking the industry. So that would be my answer. The industry would need to shrink because of the depletion of natural resources. So I think the stakes are very high. And secondly, if we are not able to start decarbonizing our industry, we're gonna fall behind all of the other industries that are putting a lot of effort into that. And I think in general in food system, it's it's becoming a topic that is in top of mind of a lot of consumers. What's the carbon footprint behind our proteins? So we might not be able to compete as a bluefin tuna industry, maybe against salmon, or maybe against uh, I don't know. Maybe a lot of people go more into bivalves and they start eating a lot more oysters, clams. So I think that we can lose market if we are not able to have these things right. So
Yeah.
that would be the two answers. Having to
Yeah.
shrink are just the stocks that we're taking out and therefore shrinking the operation. And the other risk is losing market share.
Yeah. No, that's good answers. Have you pressure from when you're talking about sustainability and bans and cuts and things? Have you pressure from environmental NGOs where you are?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely a lot. Of course, there's pressure, but like I mentioned, I think that pressure is necessary. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not gonna come here to your podcast and say that the industry is where it needs to be.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes if you ask me, and I am sure if you ask other sustainability professionals, Sometimes that criticism that comes from outside is welcomed because we need pressure from different sides to be able to push for the change that is needed. So I welcome that criticism. I welcome that pressure because sometimes it also opens our eyes to things that we were maybe blind to.
That's very healthy. The problem sometimes that's found here is this is a wild caught fishing, and they have endless amounts of money, and the industry doesn't have that.
Uh, I mean, as long as criticism is, as long as the criticism comes from science perspective and not narrative perspective, I think it's healthy.
Yeah,
And I think that's when the industry sometimes clashes with some NGOs. Is that some NGOs out there are driving other private interests and not science based nor ecological reasons. It's
yeah,
so that's when the world starts. This conversation starts getting distorted because you're talking about what's the interest that you're really defending, right? So if you're not coming from an environmental and science point of view, and it's being more driven by who's your sponsor, that's where we have a lot of issues, I think.
yeah, yeah. No, where I was more coming from there, Rodrigo, was the problem. Sometimes there's what? Well, no, I'll put it another way, and I've actually had this quote from a scientist. He says, "There's a massive difference between a fisheries scientist and an environmental scientist."
Definitely, yeah, huge difference,
Yeah,
huge.
yeah. Rodrigo, where can our listeners follow you online? Have you a social media presence?
Um, you can follow us at bajaquafarms.usa, and that's where they can follow us on our Instagram. And if anybody wants to link with me, they can find me on LinkedIn by my name, Rodrigo Armada. That's mainly my socials. Instagram is really more for personal reasons. I don't put a lot of professional work out there. But yeah, they definitely go follow bajaquafarms.usa and their Instagram, Facebook pages. And you can also find us on TikTok. And for me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn by my name, Rodrigo Armada.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We'll just fold up, and I appreciate your time, Rodrigo, and I hope things go very well for you.
Thank you very much, Jim. It was a pleasure. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
day.
And you, thank you.